Hiya and welcome to Brain Injury Advice, where we'll provide help and advice for people after a brain injury. My name's Brooke and I've lived with a traumatic brain injury since 2007.
Hi, I'm Ashwini and I'm a trustee at Headway Warrington. I'm also a senior associate solicitor focusing on catastrophic injury, including brain injury.
Thank you for returning to listen to part 2 of this interview. With your clients then, what sort of things do you do with them?
Yeah, so quite often I might be asked to do an assessment of someone's nutritional needs. Mm-hmm. So I would have a look at I always start where somebody's at, because I feel that we eat the way we eat for a reason, and to come in and completely change the way someone eats rarely works. So I always kind of find out what they're eating at the moment, why they're eating it, who they're eating it with, who cooks for them, who shops, and we work from there. So if somebody's meeting their nutritional needs, then, I've got the opinion of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, carry on. And sometimes people just like that reassurance to know that they're doing everything great. Otherwise, if they're not meeting their nutritional needs, then there's a priority list there, if you like, of what things can we tweak so that they're meeting their nutritional needs but still maintaining their independence and still maintaining the way that they're eating for the reasons that they eat.
Working with people post-brain injury, and you've talked about obviously looking at the way that they eat and what works for them. Can you perhaps come up with some sort of tips in terms of how to promote good nutrition that is also obviously helpful towards brain recovery and just general health, but that can be interesting, that can stimulate senses, stimulate imagination, and make it a more pleasurable experience, even if, they are sort of compensating for deficits in smell and taste?
Yeah.
That's something that's really I've wanted help with, is nutrition, because I just don't know, apart from you have a little bit of protein, a little bit of carbs.
And loads of vegetables.
Vegetables, which is the standard British plate, however it's called. But
yeah, balanced plate. Yeah, I think the main thing is to focus on nutrition. I think quite often we see food very negatively. Yeah. We see food as calories and we see food as bad and fat, and actually our bodies need a huge amount of nutrition, and particularly after any kind of traumatic injury. So kind of seeing food as goodness and nutrition and enjoying food. I think that's one of the most important things, is that food should be enjoyed. And I think we have so much emotion linked with food that's negative. So guilt, should be doing better. So nutrition. Got to be good. Yeah. Rewarding myself, treating myself, all of that. Whereas actually, we need to see food as nutrition and important and the priority, and enjoy it. So the balanced plate, so we talk about, a third of a plate protein, a third of a plate starchy carbs, and a third of your plate vegetables is a really good way of kind of making sure you're getting all that nutrition in. But then I think it's also mindfully eating. Yes. So it's it's enjoying your food,
but being present with it and noticing what you're eating.
Yeah. So being involved in every aspect of your nutrition is really important. So, if you can be involved in the shopping, the meal planning, so that you're choosing what you are going to eat. That's all really important.
And I guess coming back to what we were talking about people in hospital, they're not involved in that because it's being prepared for them, it's being brought to them, it's taken away. Yeah. All you're doing is literally hand to mouth eating it.
So it's just a job, really.
Yeah,
isn't it? A task that needs doing.
If you are involved in the preparation, but that in itself, we know, certainly I know from working with clients post-brain injury, and this is where we have occupational therapists involved, is that sometimes that sequencing of meal preparation, planning, organising, preparing can also be compromised because of their injury.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's trying to make sure it's graded and that it's achievable for people, because, if they're completely exhausted by cooking a meal, they're not going to have any appetite to then eat it. So it might be about preparing a meal in the morning. Quite often we use slow cookers. Yeah. So that actually when you're tired or later on in the day, you've got a meal that you've been involved in. I think it's meal planning is really important from that point of view because it takes away all the many decisions then in the week. I mean, they say we make 200 decisions a day about food.
Wow.
So that might be what we eat, where we eat, who we eat with, how much we eat. So for somebody after a brain injury, that's a huge amount of choices to be making.
It's quite a cognitively overloading process.
Hugely. Yeah. So it's having that balance of making sure somebody has the choice and involvement, but not overloading them.
And I guess meal planning, again, can be an important part of someone's rehabilitation journey, because again, it feeds into that sort of the OT's role, the occupational therapist role of helping someone with, regain their planning skills.
Yeah, definitely. So, it needs to be managed very carefully to make sure that the person's in the centre of that whole process.
Yeah.
Did you have any support with that, Brooke, when you left hospital?
I think one of the big things when you come out of hospital is like so much is done for you when you're in hospital, and then you have to come back and you think you're going to be totally fine when you come out, but then when you come out, you've got all these decisions to make that were made for you when you're in hospital. When I had the accident, I was living in Manchester as a student. When I was discharged, I went back to my parents' house back in Scarborough, where I'm from, which is like, you do all these things. I'd been travelling around the world, and then I'd gone to I'd moved to Manchester at uni. You're trying to get your independence, and then you kind of all the way back to step one, back at mum and dad's house. I guess a lot of them decisions were still made for me. I've got, I have got a good family like that, which I'm immensely grateful for. But, you do want to be independent as well. But I think 15 years on, I still struggle with decision making like that. I still go by I don't always do it, but I still go by the things that the OTs taught me, which was meal planning, looking at meal planning for the week, and then you look at what ingredients you need and then buy the right ingredients for that. I'm not saying I'm perfect with that, but I do use some of the...
That's good though. That's still 15 years on, you're still using those techniques consistently.
I find I'm still I'm sort of realising how good they were at the time, realising you realise something that, that's a good idea to only buy what you need. I was told that 15 years ago, but I just think with... Well, my experience of brain injury anyway, I only take things on when I'm sort of ready to take them on. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, isn't it? You can tell them you could tell me what you want, but I was always very good at pretending I understood, but it didn't want to.
But I suppose if you're invested in something, you've seen the benefit of meal planning, so you do it and you do it consistently. And again, coming back to what I was saying before, that, food is such an intrinsic part of the human experience. So in a way, I think there's a good chance of investment in the kind of rehabilitation that you're providing. So you must see quite a lot of sort of success in what you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a privilege, isn't it, to be part of the rehabilitation journey for people. But yeah, I think if you can get in at the right time, you can see real improvements. And I think people are quite nervous about seeing a dietitian. I think they quite often feel that, she's going to judge me, she's going to take this away from me. And I love just seeing the look on somebody's face as they realise that I'm not there to do that. And actually you start building up that relationship and that rapport with somebody. Yeah. And, it is just making achievable changes. One that improves someone's nutrition, but also improves their independence and their choice within food, because that's really important. And, the social side of food is so important. So quite often someone will say, don't take away my pub night. And it's like, I absolutely will not. That's really important. We keep that in because, we just get so much out of a social side of food. And I think it's, I love working with the multidisciplinary team because we're seeing the bigger picture.
Yes.
of rehab, and you can get somebody's nutrition perfect, which I think is impossible, but if the rest of their rehabilitation isn't prioritized as well, then it's just not going to work. So seeing the bigger picture for someone and seeing how they interact socially and with the family and just making that work for them is really important.
And I suppose as part of that, you're working with the multidisciplinary team. There'll be a lot of work around, say, routine. And that's probably quite important, I imagine, from a nutritional point of view, making sure that people are eating at those regular intervals, whether it's your 3 meals a day or more often kind of approach.
Yeah, because I said before that, our bodies need a huge amount of nutrition. Well, we have to be quite regulated with that. If we're missing a meal or 2 even a day, that's a huge chunk of nutrition we're not getting in. So it's trying to keep that routine, which quite often, people do thrive with a routine and a structure.
Yeah, we definitely, I think we talked about that in season 1 about the importance of structure and routine.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also, again, it's that positive, seeing nutrition positively, and that, your body needs this. It's not just about calories, because quite often I will have that, is that clients will talk to me about, I'm missing this meal because, I'm trying to be good. And it's like, no,
that's I guess that's a lot of incorrect messaging around calories and macronutrition.
Yeah, and just I suppose the negatives around health. So when I'm, in rehabilitation, I really want to look after someone's muscle. Lean muscle mass, because that's really important when often people in hospital will lose a lot of lean muscle mass because of inactivity, but also because their body's doing so much in the healing process that it's burning off that muscle. So, when I'm looking at somebody's weight, I'm not just looking at the number on the scale. I'm looking at, where's the body composition. So I'm looking at how much muscle mass they've got. Bone health is a really important thing that most people don't think about till they're too late. But I kind of feel that's my job to think about your bones. So, it's just really important, because if you're losing your muscle mass, you're losing your strength, you're losing your mobility.
Which can impact on other areas of rehabilitation.
Do you get a lot of people lying to you at first? Because the first thing I would think of if I'm seeing a nutrition is like, right, I'm better tell us that I'm eating something that I'm not eating.
No, actually, I don't. I think people are quite strangely too honest. I think they like to. I think sometimes people, like to shock, but I think most of my clients would kind of say, there's no point in me lying to you. I know that. I need to be honest. And I always kind of say, yeah, that's great, because I need to start where you're at. And if I don't know where you're at, it's really difficult. So no, we usually have some very funny conversations about, and I'm human as well. I might know it, but do I do it? Probably not all of the time.
Do as I say, don't do as I do.
Yeah, and it's, we all lead busy lives, and particularly in rehabilitation. And I do believe that food has got to fit in with your life, not the other way around. And sometimes that's the problem I see, is people trying to be too perfect with their nutrition. And then, of course, the failure from that.
I did a course in mindful eating a while ago, and it was really interesting, the sort of the messaging around it, and sort of, as well as, what we were saying before about being present and being involved in the process, planning it, enjoying it, noticing what you're eating and so on. It was also just taking away that guilt. So it's okay if you overindulge. Accept it, acknowledge it, accept it. Think about why, is it because I was feeling emotional? Is it because I was actually hungry? Is it because something, whatever it is going on, accept it and move on. And it's not necessarily the whole, the diet starts again on Monday kind of thing. It's like, it's happened, move on.
It's because it's, it's a lifestyle, isn't it? It's a way of being and, making those small changes. And I always think, in that example that you're giving, I always say, well, I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah. Because, if you are going to eat a chocolate bar and you eat it full of guilt, enjoy it.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you don't want to eat it tomorrow, that's fine. But if we have this guilt, all that does is it makes us feel like we've failed. It puts shame on us, and we're more likely to do it again.
Yeah. And I think from a rehab perspective, that could potentially set somebody back further as well in their journey, because then it's like, oh, well, what's the point, you know?
Yeah.
And whereas it's important to kind of keep pushing forwards, and it's okay, just, you know, let's talk about it, let's understand, and let's move through.
Yeah, and there can be a massive grief for people after brain injury as well. And, you know, particularly some of my clients might be really into sport before their injury. Massive part of their identity that they're a sports person. And their nutrition would have matched quite often their sport. So then after their brain injury, to not be able to do the sport to the same level is a huge grief. And then also not be able to match their nutrition, because that was their identity. So it's trying to kind of help people to understand that in rehabilitation, the nutrition you need is very similar to a sports person. You know, you're needing all that nutrition, and you're needing to feed yourself and look after yourself. And you know, there are a lot of similarities as well.
Are there any other sort of tips that you would give in terms of helping people to cope with, you know, changes, alterations to their smell and taste after brain injury, for example, in terms of what they would do with food?
Yeah, so I think, we'll put a link on the show notes to a little booklet here, which you can't see because I'm showing it, which is a booklet that myself and another dietitian from Red Pepper Nutrition has written, called The 5 Basic Tastes and Why They Matter to Us. So in there's lots of tips about how to make the most of your taste, kind of practical tips about using herbs and spices. And there's also a bit in there about the trigeminal nerve, which I don't think we've talked about.
Nope.
So this is actually a kind of a pain receptor, if you like. So things like hot food or spicy food. Tends to, and the trigeminal nerve we can really use after smell loss. Some people after smell loss really like spicy food because it's giving them that kind of feedback, that sensation. Some people find it too overpowering. So it's just trying to work with the individual and how they like to use it. But also things like using hot and cold food, maybe mixing them together is a good way of
stimulating the senses.
Yeah, stimulating the senses. And
which made me think of sticky toffee pudding and ice cream.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it's that, you know, you might not be getting the full flavour of that, but if you're getting the senses from the hot and cold is really useful. So it's just kind of, it's using all your other senses, which is basically mindful eating, isn't it? Different textures. Sometimes crunchy food might be, it's got a very different mouth feel, hasn't it? And it's just using those senses. You know, we talked about looking at our food.
Yeah.
Just a really simple
Eating the rainbow.
Yeah, eating the rainbow. So something that as dietitians are always harping on about is eating a whole range of colours, because we get different nutrients from different coloured fruits and vegetables. But, you know, if you are just being given a food and you're just eating it like it's a task, then you're not seeing what's there. So it's just really kind of visually seeing what's there. And
I suppose not eating in front of the TV either, which I suppose that it goes for everybody really, again, as part of mindful eating, actually noticing it, but particularly post brain injury, you know, when attention can be easily distractible, and again, just removing more sort of cognitive or, you know, stimuli, and just being able to focus on the one thing. And
yeah, definitely. It's just trying to be present in that, isn't it? Which is, you know, we all do it. We've all eaten a meal where we've literally got to the end of the meal and thought, who's eating that? Because we haven't been aware of it. And then, you know, it takes time for our stomach to tell our brain it's full.
Yes.
And that's why it's really important that we're satisfied after a meal, because if we're trying to restrict all the time, we're not going to be satisfied. and we're just going to eat more. And that's human nature. So it's just really important to be enjoying what you're eating and feeling satisfied after you're eating, which is quite often why we talk about half a plate of vegetables, not just because of the goodness of the vitamins and minerals. It's also because they will fill you up, and you have to be full after a meal. Otherwise, we all just raid the fridge again.
Yeah.
So it's just trying to, fill us up and get that satisfaction and get that enjoyment of food.
Yeah, and getting the good nutrients in as well.
Yeah.
I suppose one other thing that we haven't really touched on as yet, which is linked to nutrition and what we're talking about in terms of guilt, etc., but body image can be, I imagine, can be very impacted after brain injury. And we've talked in previous episodes about, losing one's sense of identity, self, and so on. But given that body image can also be linked to our diet and how we look, and that can change quite drastically post-brain injury with, for example, as you said, like loss of muscle mass or people putting on weight. So how do you work with clients around that?
People follow fad diets as well. Like myself, I've done that plenty of times. Like for instance, eating no carbs and just proteins, and that lasts about 2 days and it's become so unbearable. Or you do it for a few days and you notice yourself feeling like really low on energy, and then you have a good meal and you feel just so much better.
Yeah, and I think the fad diets probably come from just trying to get help for the body issues, isn't it? So the two are very much linked. And I think the first thing is recognising that there's a massive change to somebody's identity, a massive grieving process. And, I always think of, the going to work dressed one way, and then you might come home from hospital a few months later in jogging bottoms.
Gosh, yes.
And looking in that same mirror and just seeing a completely different person looking back at you. And, you just can't imagine the trauma involved in that. And I think it's just recognising and identifying the grief that's in there. And it might be someone, I have worked with sports people who are very fit and active, and then they might put on a bit of weight, and to everyone else it's not much, but to them it's huge.
If you've trained and you've got you're on the scales, not every day, but if you do keep an eye on your weight, you will notice it. And then you start to look for it in photos and stuff, and then add to that the getting older thing, and it's horrible, and it's something that I guess I've dealt with.
Yeah, and it's kind of listening to people on that level, isn't it? It might not seem much to the charts, or it might not seem much to you as a health professional or to family, but actually it might mean a huge amount to them that they get back to where they were. I talk a lot about strength rather than weight, because I want all my clients to be stronger. I want to look after their lean body mass and
their bone health
and get them stronger. And I think that can take the pressure off sometimes, because there is a massive change in your body composition after an injury, and that's through no fault of their own, and they can become hugely guilt around that and shame around that. But it's just working with someone to make those changes to get back to where they want to be, and not just what we feel that health is. But I think being aware of eating disorders and disordered eating after a traumatic injury is really important.
Can you just explain what disordered eating is?
So disordered eating is really, it's not a diagnosed eating disorder, but you could get disordered eating that somebody's taken control of their eating to such an extent that it's actually producing negative health consequences. Or so you could call yo-yo dieting disordered eating. It could be going on fad diets. It could
skipping
be
meals.
It's just when I suppose your eating pattern isn't optimal, but it's causing other problems. And we do see that quite a lot, and it's just people trying to get the help they need. So they're trying to control. Food is one of the few things you can control. So, it's trying to get that control back of food, and sometimes it can lead to suboptimal eating and even health issues. And we do see it a lot after a traumatic injury because of the trauma they've been through, and trying to just regain some of that control around eating.
Yeah. I mean, that is a huge thing, because after injury, you lose so much control. You have so much input, people telling you what to do, people doing things to you.
Yeah.
And you want to prove that you're independent, don't you?
Yeah.
You're still the same person.
Yeah. And also, just not, I don't know, things that you took for granted before being able to do suddenly for whatever reason, and for reasons that you might not understand or have insight into, that control is lost. So I can totally see why food is something that you think, oh, well, at least I know what I'm putting in my mouth, or not.
Yeah. And quite often we will see people after traumatic injury starving themselves as a way of reducing their weight, because that's the message they're hearing. You weigh too much. You need to get your weight down. Well, how do I do that? Well, I remember that you cut your calories, you cut your...
Yeah.
So that's the way I'll do it. So it's a really difficult one, but I think if it's recognised first of all, then that's really important.
Yeah. And it's one of these topics that you could go on forever about, because there's such a link with psychological issues as well, and why somebody's putting on weight, and what's the root cause. And I think, without getting on any kind of soapbox, it's perhaps something that within the NHS isn't necessarily explored as much. The message is you have to get your weight down, but how much work is going into the why is this like this, and actually how healthy are you anyway? What's your lifestyle like?
I think it's...
Because, don't get me started on BMI.
Well, it's taking our eyes off the scales as a society. We do just... It's looking at people's health, and that's irrespective of what they weigh. That people are more than a number, and quite often you'll hear of people saying, I want to get back to the weight I was when I got married. But actually that's not healthy. It's about embracing who we are at different life stages, and at different life stages we will be different weights, but we can still be healthy within those weights. But I think, unfortunately, as a society, we do praise the weight loss of I've lost a couple of pounds, but we don't praise the health changes quite so much. So it's kind of, it's just seeing past the scales. Yeah. Throw the scales away.
And I think, especially someone going through the rehabilitation journey, well, there's so many people suddenly in their lives, like looking at this aspect, looking at that aspect. It just seems to be one more thing. And so, I think if we can reduce the pressure of, you've got to get those numbers down, and actually let's look at your lifestyle, let's look at how to make you healthy, strong, and how the benefit of doing those things on other aspects of your rehabilitation journey, surely that's more important than just ticking the numbers down.
Yeah, it's looking at the bigger picture of rehabilitation and working with everybody within that quite massive team.
And I think that's it. That that's the importance of working within a multidisciplinary team rather than in isolation. So you can all work together to achieve those goals and in different ways.
And, thinking long term, quite a lot of my clients, I'll come in, spend a certain amount of time with them and then back off, which is the right thing to do. But I need to make sure that my involvement has helped their health long term.
Yes.
There's no point in just coming in, perhaps achieving some weight loss for a certain amount of time and then going and that weight loss regaining. So one of my goals when we are trying to get weight loss is that whatever weight you lose, I want that to stay off. Because, that's more important to health, because then you're maintaining your lean muscle mass. And you're maintaining those changes.
And it's the consistent maintenance of those changes, a bit like Brooke's consistent meal planning. You invest in it, see the benefit, and keep going at that.
And you mentioned the psychologists before. The psychology of food is just so important. We rarely eat because, we're hungry or because, nutritionally I need to get this in. We eat for so many other reasons, and the psychological side of it, especially after such a massive trauma, is huge. And I love working with the neuropsychologists as well.
It's absolutely fascinating.
It is.
I mean, that's been really, really interesting. And as I say, it's probably one of those subjects we could go on forever, but we are trying to keep these things bite-sized. So I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us today. That's been so valuable.
Thank you so much
and I'm sure our listeners will really enjoy it too. And as mentioned before, we will put links to Fifth Sense and Absence on the show notes, as well as your leaflet on the 5 basic tastes and why they matter to us. And we'll also be putting your details on our show notes as well. But perhaps if you want to just give your contact details now, in case anyone wants to get in touch.
Yeah, no problem. If this is of interest and you want to learn some more, there are some kind of articles on website as well. So that's www.redpeppernutrition.com. And if you want to contact myself directly, then my email is Sian, which is spelled Sian, at redpeppernutrition.com.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much again for coming in to talk to us.
Thank you.
Please don't forget to follow, subscribe and share our content. If you do have any suggestions for topics that you'd like us to cover, why not drop us a line at hi@braininjurybites.co.uk.